Hey, everybody, welcome back to a SUBTA Studios Friday Live. I'm your host, Chris George, co-founder and chairman of SUBTA. Super excited today. I've got our guest, Trey Smith, who is the CEO of Trinity Payments, who's going to be on the show with us today. And on this show, we're going to touch on a bunch of different topics, but one of them being around this term, which is called friendly fraud, which we're going to get into. And it's a term that I kind of learned more recently. But once you learn more about it, it makes sense. And something that we're all dealing with within our business. So Trey, thanks so much for being on the show with us today.
Chris, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Before we get started, just tell a little bit everybody about yourself and a little bit more about Trinity Payments.
Yeah, so Trinity Payments is a fintech company. We're based out of Southern California. We specialize in building solutions for merchants that basically allow them to focus more on the business than on the act of the payment itself. So that sounds very general, but really just providing them data, hardware and software that really allow them to drive what's important to them.
And so as a fintech business, like it's important to you for people to get a lot of value, or like you're doing things that are out of the norm from what we'll say the term is payment processing, right? Like you're getting into more things for the merchant. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So the traditional payment processor is basically a commodity at this point. I mean, there's a million different payment processors. Where we're really trying to differentiate ourselves is by building technology, true technology that allows the merchant to kind of go beyond just that traditional payment processor. I can accept a credit card.
Great. That's great. And so to start, I know me and you had this pre-call and there was this term friendly fraud. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that, what that means, and
Sure.
How does that affect the business and how can businesses handle that?
Firstly, there is nothing friendly about friendly fraud. Essentially, it's virtual shoplifting. People are intentionally taking from your business. It's an authorized cardholder that is disputing or charging back a legitimate sale.
And so what's the percentages like? Do you have any data around how often this is happening? Is it more common in subscriptions? Is this something that these brands need to be thinking about? And how do they handle those situations?
So I don't have any specific data around friendly fraud specific to subscription, but in the e-commerce world in general, it's definitely more prevalent. I think in 2021, we're anticipating 18% of all retail sales will move to e-commerce. Obviously, there's an opportunity for fraudsters to take advantage of that because you don't see them. You don't actually have their card in hand. You can't check their ID the way that you would in a retail store. So unfortunately, there's always going to be the bad actors in the world that look to take advantage of these businesses.
And so I think what's important too is that I think with subscriptions it's probably a little bit more common, right? Because like they're getting caught up in like a contract potentially. And so
Sure.
Not a contract, but they're getting into something where they're paying monthly. So that could be sorry, that's my dogs. Everybody knows me. I got my two huskies. So
we're gonna let the dog answer.
Yeah, they're making some noise. They had to come with me today. So with subscriptions, people are getting into more of a continuity sort of case. And so I got to believe that there's more friendly fraud that's happening, right? And maybe there's some purchase regret or also too, if we think about it, like with the subscription boxes, like they don't know what they're getting. So if they don't like what they're getting, they're probably more prone to like the friendly fraud. How do you recommend the brands handle the friendly fraud, or what's a way to like manage that?
Well, firstly, prevention is key, right? The same way that a retail store would hire a security guard to put at the front of the business as a deterrent. There's a number of different third-party softwares that a e-commerce merchant can deploy. I don't want to name any of them for fear that it looks like I'm pushing one brand versus another. But these third parties essentially just kind of weed through the consumer's behavior, their normal credit card transactions, if they've purchased from you previously, and they'll weed them out. And it gives you an opportunity to then say, yeah, I want to take this sale, or no, maybe it doesn't look quite right.
I can imagine some proactive prevention is a good thing too, right?
Absolutely. It's like with anything. It's like with anything.
So going into the payment processing, what are some things that you'd recommend? Like, what are some challenges that you're seeing within payment processing, and what are some things that these traditional e-commerce brands can do to deal with it?
Uh, some of the issues that they're having, I think it starts at the beginning. You need to make sure that you're working with a payment processor that understands your business. There are a million payment processors out there. A lot of them specialize in one particular vertical. Most of them are retail focused. So finding a payment processor that really understands the subscription model is key, because we know that there's inherently going to be more chargebacks on the e-commerce side. And then when you add that subscription element to it, it only increases. So just finding someone that understands that can help you by providing you data and analytics to show you where maybe some of the pain points are.
And so, and I think like initially, like you said, there's so many different payment processors. I probably get like 10 emails a week on, so, something like that. And then like, I think like traditionally it's like, well, who can do the best price? But like, there's more to it than like,
Yeah,
what's the cheapest rate, right? Because you want good customer
yeah.
service, you want to be able to use the data. What are some things you recommend that, oh, my dog's in the bark. I turn to see somebody. He's all right. What are some things you recommend for brands to look for outside of just price? Like, what should they look for in a really good payment processor?
Sure. So price is always going to be important, right? We're in business to make money. Not we being the payment processors, but as entrepreneurs, we start a business to make money, right? So price is going to be important. But as I mentioned before, finding a payment processor that really understands that model. So asking questions about their chargeback thresholds and what they will and won't allow, and if they have any software that can help you mitigate chargebacks on the front end, if they can recommend any chargeback management on the back end. Those are all key elements to run a successful e-commerce reoccurring business.
And so you touched on chargebacks there, and I know that could be a real problem for some of these brands. And there's some third-party software I think that like help manage chargebacks, but
Sure.
what are your thoughts on that, and what are some things that the brands can do to limit the chargebacks?
There's a few different things, right? So friendly fraud aside, we talked about that. Obviously, the prevention part on the front end is important, but making sure that you have a clear descriptor is very, very important. And as your payment processor, they should know what that means. Typically, your descriptor, which is the identifier that the consumer would see on their bank statement, is very clear as to who you are as the merchant. So
the name on the charge, right? Like the name.
Yeah,
because you're right. That's happened to
absolutely.
me. We're all like looking like, what is this charge? And then like it was like another. Yeah, that's actually really smart. That's a really good tip for those
Yeah.
listening. Like I think making sure that name's clear is really important.
Absolutely. Also, I'd recommend some type of delivery confirmation. If you're sending out a product on a reoccurring basis, you want to make sure that the product's actually reaching your consumer. That's obviously an opportunity for chargeback or dispute if you've billed them and they never received the product. So that's key in itself. Also, I would recommend touching your client as much as possible. Prior to billing them, let them know that, hey, we're going to be billing you again next Thursday, either via email, we have text message, send them a carrier pigeon, whatever it is that you need to do to make them aware that this is going to happen, and then give them the opportunity to cancel at that point. Obviously, that can reduce the likelihood for chargeback. As a consumer, I know it makes me feel more comfortable when I'm engaged with a company that is billing me consistently.
Is there like an amount, right? Because look, there's twofold to this. On the one side, a lot of brands don't send the email saying that they're renewing.
Right.
I think because they're scared to email because they'll go to cancel. But you should never be scared to
Yeah.
communicate with your consumer. But on the
Yeah.
flip side, I gotta believe, because there's the biggest brands in the world aren't reminding you. I gotta believe there's a dollar amount probably that makes sense. So if it's like under 50 or over, right? Like it's less imperative to have to remind. If it's over X amount, it's probably more imperative to remind. Have you seen anything like that? And I know we didn't talk about this before, but maybe off the top of your head, you've seen something around that.
Yeah, sure. I would say transactions that are $20 and below, obviously you're going to see less chargebacks there. You move up to the next rung of, between $20 and $50. Those price points are important. Yeah. So the lower the price point, people tend to forget about it. As that price starts to creep up, people will remember when they go to the grocery store and they don't have that $100 that they thought they had before.
Right. And I know you've got a lot of knowledge with chargebacks. How can we educate the listeners around like the amount of time they have to respond and things of that nature? How does that work?
So when a chargeback occurs, basically that means that the consumer has reached out to their card issuing bank rather than contacting the merchant. So that's the first problem. I think making sure that you are easy to contact, even if you're not notifying them prior to the billing. If I go to your website and your contact information is buried somewhere at the bottom, that makes it a little bit more difficult. Unfortunately, consumers are getting more and more lazy. And if they have to go searching for a way to find you, they're just going to call their bank because that's easy. They know that number, or they can quickly find it on the back of their credit card. So making sure that you are easy to get to is very, very important. Sorry, I got off topic.
No, you were there. So, but like, yeah. And then so the time. So let's say you get a chargeback. Now, what's the next steps? How long do they have to respond? Things like that.
That's right. So after a chargeback occurs, you have 30 days to respond. At that point, you are to provide them with as much information as possible to show that that's a legitimate sale. So whether you have some type of agreement that they signed initially when they signed up for your reoccurring sale, typically there's a disclaimer on your website indicating that, hey, we're going to be billing you on this schedule, every 14 days or whatever the case may be, right? So being able to present that, if you're collecting the IP address, showing that, hey, this is the person, it came from this IP address, this is who they are, they signed up for it, we disclosed to them, they signed up for that, as much as possible is important. At that point, then the third party, typically the issuer, will take your information and determine whether or not it is a legitimate sale.
And what's the success rate when you prove that stuff out?
That's all over the place. It just really depends on how meticulous you are in collecting that information and presenting it. So that's why we always recommend, if you are going to do it yourself, make sure that you're training your staff on what exactly to collect. Make sure that you are getting as much information as possible on the front end, and then presenting that in a clear manner. Most times we recommend that you work with a company that specializes in chargeback management.
Is there any benefit to trying to reach out to the customer first before responding to the chargeback?
No, not really. I mean, once the chargeback has been initiated, even if the consumer decides like, hey, yeah, maybe that was my fault, the chargeback's still been initiated. And from a payment processing perspective, whether you win, you lose, or it's been retracted, it still counts against you, unfortunately. It's kind of a silly process. It's very antiquated in that sense, but.
Yeah. And how big is the problem overall in e-commerce? How big is the chargeback problem? Is it big?
The problem is growing. There's a reason why there are more and more chargeback management companies popping up. And there's a reason why even the larger brands, these huge enterprise companies, the Targets of the world and the Walmarts of the world, are starting to pay attention. Because unfortunately, even if it doesn't affect you from a payment processing perspective, you're basically inviting people and telling people that, hey, you can rip me off. We don't fight back. So I think it is very important for any business at any level to engage in this process of fighting these chargebacks.
Is there like a tool or something you recommend in regards to like tracking individuals that have had multiple chargebacks, like for future purchases?
Yeah, so some of the fraud prevention tools that I mentioned earlier do exactly that. It tracks consumer behavior. It looks to see if they filed other chargebacks, if they've had issues with other merchants, and those things will alert you as the merchant to say, hey, this may be somebody that you want to take a second look at. Yeah,
So I
before
think that's
you
what ends
accept
up
the sale.
happening. Some of them, like, you get that one individual, again, we'll call it what it is. Like, they kind of keep coming back because they know that they've done it once. And you want to
Yeah.
track, because I remember even when we had our own business, it was like every month this person said the box didn't arrive, but it shows delivered and they want a refund like
Yeah.
I'm sending out 5,000 packages. Like, this one person always happens to not get, you know. So I think that's important that brands think about a tool that can help track that. And then, how do you prevent the future purchases without like keeping an eye on it yourself? Is there something that stops that individual, like that address, that name, credit card? Is there something automated
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So again, there are third-party tools that will help you with that. It's a part of that prevention. So if they see that, hey, we've had an issue with this particular consumer in the past, do we want to take this sale here? Maybe that's an opportunity for you to touch them with your customer service department and say, hey, we see that you're purchasing again. We issued a refund for you last month because you said the product didn't arrive. Like, you can dig a little bit deeper and touch that consumer before you make the determination that you want to take that sale.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I know that another part of what Trinity Payments does is you're getting into a lot of understanding the data of the merchant data that's coming in and that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how they can use that data that can help grow their business or scale their business. What are ways you're going to be looking at that, for these brands?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually specialize in e-commerce, I'll say. So we track chargeback behavior very closely. We look at decline behavior very closely. I think and what we're presenting at Trinity is taking a lot of the analytics that we would use on the back end for risk mitigation and actually sharing that with some of our merchants, giving you the tools that we use to determine, how your business is running. In the chargeback behavior, there's a lot that'll tell you about where your pain points are. If you have certain chargebacks that say, product not delivered in your drop shipping, you may have a problem with your fulfillment center. So those are things that we're looking to basically provide to our merchant base to give them a little more information.
Oh, yeah, that's actually it's great because late delivery. What would be some other reasons they might charge back?
Well, unfortunately, some of the issuing banks that are issuing these chargebacks are starting to get lazy. So we have these general codes that we're having to fight too. These issuing banks, they just don't have the bandwidth to deal with all these chargebacks. So a lot of times they'll just put them under a general code. But I mean, it can be product not delivered. It can be product not
as described or something.
As described.
Yeah.
There's a few different codes that we see most often, and it really does change business to business.
Yeah. What else do you want to add in terms of payment processing or chargebacks or friendly fraud to those listening, especially in the subscription space? Anything else you want to add in there from what Trinity Payments does, or any thoughts around like helping them grow their business, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Again, at the end of the day, it's about prevention. Firstly, making sure that we're taking that extra step to ensure that the consumers that we're bringing in are consumers that we want. Pay attention to your traffic sources. Some people are driving their own traffic organically. Others are hiring affiliate networks and companies of that nature that'll drive the traffic. Make sure that you understand where those sales and clicks are coming from, because that does affect chargeback behavior. Make sure that you have a chargeback management plan in place, because again, win, lose, or draw, whether you get the money back or the consumer wins that chargeback, either way, it counts against your payment processing. So as you're scaling the business, obviously, if you have a problem with a little bit of volume, it's only going to be compounded as you start to do more and more sales. So make sure that you have a good prevention, risk management, and chargeback management process in place.
And I think I just learned this actually not long ago, maybe a year or two ago. But when you do a refund or a chargeback, you get merchant fee again, right? Or
So
no?
refund is different.
Okay.
We do recommend, yeah, we recommend refunding, and that's why I said make it easy for your clients or your consumers to find you, because if you don't refund their money, it will turn into a chargeback.
I see. And the
Um,
chargeback costs more.
yes, chargeback costs more because you're not only losing the amount that you collected, you've lost your product at that point, unless they send it back. But per the
Right.
rules, they don't have to send it back in order to get a refund. Yeah,
And is there a processing fee again, though? Like, do they pay the merchant fee again? I think
there
that
is a
happened.
fine typically. There's a
Okay.
fine per
Yeah.
chargeback.
Yeah.
Typically, it's anywhere between $25 and $35.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Trey, I want to say thank you so much for jumping on the show. Thank you so much for being a great SUBTA partner. For those of you that watch this, if you watch this post of being live, if you have any questions, Trey and his team are here to help you out with any questions you have around chargebacks and friendly fraud. They are great supporters of SUBTA. Trey, if anybody wants to get a hold of your team, what's the best way they could reach out?
The best way to touch the Trinity team is sales@trinitypaysol.com.
Great. And we got Sub Summit this year, September 21st to the 23rd. I think you guys are hopefully going to be there. And
We
for
look
those of you
forward to
watching, yeah, thank you. And
it.
for those of you watching, again, any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You guys know my email. It's Chris@SUBTA. If you have any questions for Trey and the Trinity team, it's sales@trinitypayments.com, right? That was what it was?
Trinity Paysol.
Trinity Paysol.
Paysol.
We'll put that in the comments, actually. We'll have someone from our team put
Perfect.
it in the comments. But again, Trey, thanks so much. I hope you have a great weekend, and I look forward to working together here in the future.
Thanks again for having me. We appreciate it. Looking forward to working with you in the future.
Great. Thanks. See you. See you, everybody.
Take you webinar, if you could shut that out real quick.
I don't know what you're talking about.